In June 2022, the world watched a Hollywood success story spiral into something far more disturbing. Ezra Miller, once celebrated as the lightning-fast hero of the DC universe, was suddenly at the center of a series of allegations so strange, so unpredictable, that even seasoned investigators struggled to understand what they were witnessing. A missing teenager, panicked parents, reports of manipulation, disappearing flights, and a secluded 39-acre compound rumored to hold weapons, drugs, and a small circle of followers who believed Miller possessed spiritual power. Every headline felt more unreal than the last, and yet each one pointed to the same chilling question. How did one of Hollywood's brightest young stars lose control this completely? But the truth is even darker than what made the news, because these events weren't sudden. They were the result of a transformation that had been unfolding quietly for years. And the deeper you look into the timeline, the accusations, the testimonies, and the moments Hollywood tried to bury, the more unsettling this story becomes. Today, we pull back the curtain on the case of Ezra Miller, a rise, a breakdown, and a descent into chaos that shocked an entire industry. Before the controversies, before the headlines turned into a relentless storm, Ezra Miller occupied a rare position in Hollywood, one reserved only for the industry's most promising talents. They were not just another young actor rising through indie films, they were a phenomenon. By their early 20s, Ezra had already built a reputation as a magnetic, unpredictable performer with a presence that critics called unsettling in the most compelling way. Their early performances, in The Perks of Being a Wallflower and We Need to Talk About Kevin, revealed a depth and intensity unusual for someone so young. Hollywood saw not just potential, but inevitability. Ezra Miller was going to become one of the defining actors of their generation. And in 2016, that prediction seemed to crystallize into reality when Ezra stepped into the role of the Flash in the DC Extended Universe. It was the kind of role that doesn't just elevate a career, it anchors a franchise, secures multi-million-dollar contracts, and cements public adoration. Combined with their recurring role in the Fantastic Beasts series, Ezra wasn't simply rising. They were everywhere. Fan conventions, magazine covers, late-night shows. Their style was unconventional, their personality magnetic, and their presence felt refreshing in an industry often obsessed with predictability. To many, Ezra represented a new kind of Hollywood star. Bold, boundary-breaking, unapologetically strange. But beneath the surface of that eccentric charm, insiders quietly noticed patterns that didn't align with the persona celebrated on red carpets. Moments of volatility, unusual outbursts, and a growing sense of unpredictability marked their interactions behind the scenes. None of it was public yet, but it was there, lingering like a spark, waiting for the wrong moment to ignite. And when it finally did, the transformation would shock not just fans, but the very industry that had once embraced Ezra as its next big thing. Long before Ezra Miller's public collapse captured global attention, there were early fractures, small, easily dismissed at the time, but unmistakable in hindsight. These were not the scandals, the arrests, or the disappearances that would later dominate headlines. These were the subtle red flags that quietly signaled a deeper turmoil beneath the surface of a rising star. Even during Ezra's teenage years, those who worked closely with them noticed a duality, a performer capable of intense emotional depth on camera, yet struggling to maintain stability away from it. Their breakthrough performance, in We Need to Talk About Kevin was haunting not just for audiences, but for some crew members who later admitted they couldn't tell where the character ended and Ezra began. The boundary between role and reality seemed to blur, as if Ezra carried pieces of every troubled character with them, long after the cameras stopped rolling. By the early 2000s, hints of volatility began surfacing more frequently. A minor arrest for disorderly conduct, a confrontation at a fan event that was later brushed off as artistic eccentricity, an unsettling comfort with chaos that those around Ezra chalked up to youth, fame, and the pressures of rapid success. Hollywood tends to forgive brilliance, especially when it's packaged inside a rising box office asset. And so, these moments, strange, uncomfortable, but not yet alarming, were quietly ignored. But beneath those early incidents was a deeper pattern, a growing attraction to fringe ideologies, unconventional spiritual practices, and a fascination with messianic symbolism. Ezra spoke often about destiny, transformation, and spiritual awakening. Conversations that seemed eccentric at first, but would later take on a far more troubling significance. These were the first shadows of a trajectory that no one, not even those closest to Ezra, could fully comprehend. Small signs that hinted at something gathering, something unresolved, something on the verge of breaking. And soon, it would. Ezra Miller's ascent in Hollywood wasn't gradual, it was explosive. By their early 20s, Ezra had already achieved what most actors spend entire careers chasing: critical acclaim, commercial success, and a devoted fan base drawn to their unconventional charm. Hollywood adored them, not because they fit the mold, but because they broke it. Ezra was unpredictable in a way that felt exciting, refreshing, and, at the time, harmless. Their breakout roles showcased a rare emotional intensity, the kind that casting directors call once in a decade. Ezra could shift from vulnerable to volatile in a single breath, embodying characters who felt unsettlingly real. When they were cast as the Flash for the DC Extended Universe, it marked a turning point not just in their career, but in their cultural impact. Suddenly, Ezra wasn't just an indie darling. They were a global superhero, a face splashed across billboards, magazine covers, and Comic-Con stages. And Hollywood followed. The Fantastic Beasts franchise brought them into the heart of a billion-dollar universe. Studio executives spoke about Ezra as the future, someone capable of anchoring blockbuster franchises for years. Fans admired their bold fashion, their outspoken nature, their refusal to conform. Ezra didn't just play eccentric characters, they lived as one, and for a while, the world celebrated it. But buried beneath the glamour and applause was something more fragile. Fame didn't stabilize Ezra, it amplified every unresolved impulse. The very qualities that made them magnetic on screen began spilling into real life in ways that were harder to control. Small controversies were dismissed as quirks. Boundary-pushing behavior was reframed as artistic freedom. And each pass, each excuse, allowed the edges to fray a little more. Hollywood believed it was witnessing the rise of a groundbreaking star. But in reality, it was watching a spark grow brighter, right before the flame began to burn out of control. The first cracks in Ezra Miller's public image didn't explode, they whispered, not with headlines or scandals, but with moments that, in hindsight, feel like warnings no one recognized. At the time, each incident was small enough to dismiss. Taken together, they formed a pattern that hinted at a storm gathering. In 2017, at a Comic-Con event meant to celebrate fans, Ezra kissed a male attendee without consent. a moment brushed aside as eccentric humor. The fan laughed awkwardly, the crowd moved on, and the industry excused it as part of Ezra's unpredictable charm. But for those paying attention, this was a signal, a boundary crossed without hesitation, without consideration, and without consequence. Behind the scenes, crew members described an increasingly volatile presence, sudden mood swings, cryptic monologues about destiny and transformation, a fixation on spiritual symbolism that blurred into something more obsessive. What once seemed like harmless eccentricity took on a sharper edge, one less playful, more erratic. As Hollywood pushed forward with major franchises, Ezra's world outside the camera began unraveling quietly. A minor arrest here, a public outburst there, nothing big enough to derail a rising star, but enough to plant unease. Industry insiders whispered about unpredictability, about behaviors that didn't align with the poised image presented at premieres. Still, the momentum of fame protected Ezra. Studios had too much at stake. Fans loved them too much. And so each warning was buried under red carpets and movie trailers. But the shift was already underway. Ezra moved deeper into fringe spiritual circles, seeking guidance from mystics and advisors who reinforced their belief in possessing a higher purpose. Their self-image grew more grandiose, and their grip on reality began to loosen in ways that no one around them fully understood. These early fractures, ignored and excused, would eventually widen into fault lines, and soon the quiet whispers of instability would erupt into a public collapse unlike anything Hollywood had seen in decades. The collapse wasn't a single moment. It was an avalanche, a chain of events so chaotic, so unsettling, that Hollywood went from confusion to disbelief to outright panic, and it began in the spring of 2022, when a series of accusations surfaced that shattered every remaining illusion about who Ezra Miller had become. On June 7th, the world woke to headlines that seemed impossible. A prominent indigenous family filed a protection order against Ezra, accusing them of manipulating their daughter, an 18-year-old activist once celebrated for her brilliance and independence. But the allegations didn't stop at emotional control. They spoke of bruises, isolation, radical behavioral changes, and a growing dependency that left the young woman unrecognizable to her family. The most alarming part? Ezra and the teen had vanished. They were moving between states, eluding authorities, leaving behind cryptic messages and frightened witnesses. But this was only the surface. Reports emerged of a 39-acre compound in Vermont, Ezra's secluded property, rumored to hold weapons, unstable conditions, and a small circle of young followers who treated Ezra less like an actor and more like a messianic guide. Witnesses claimed Ezra dictated when people slept, ate, or spoke, and that dissent was met with explosive anger. What began as eccentricity had morphed into something far more disturbing: influence without boundaries. Then came the arrests in Hawaii. A karaoke bar incident escalated into a violent confrontation. A thrown chair injured a woman. Police reports described Ezra's behavior as erratic, combative, and delusional, insisting they were being targeted for an NFT conspiracy, demanding badges, refusing searches, spiraling further with each encounter. Footage circulated online, each clip more alarming than the last. More accusations followed, breaking into homes, threatening couples, frightening young children, and making statements about spiritual destinies that left even longtime supporters unsettled. A Rolling Stone investigation revealed claims that Ezra kept a mother and 3 children at their Vermont property under unsafe conditions, with firearms reportedly scattered around areas accessible to toddlers. The industry that once protected Ezra began to pull away, quietly at first, then decisively. Warner Brothers distanced itself. Publicists resigned. Former colleagues expressed concern, but admitted they no longer recognized the person at the center of the chaos. By the time The Flash premiered in 2023, Ezra's image had fully inverted, from a beloved superhero to a figure surrounded by fear, confusion, and unanswered questions. Their disappearance after the premiere only deepened the mystery. Ezra Miller wasn't just falling. They had already fallen. When the dust finally settled, Ezra Miller didn't return to Hollywood as a controversial star. They returned as a question, a puzzle the industry wasn't prepared to solve. Their disappearance after the Flash premiere only intensified the mystery. No social media, no statements, no interviews. Ezra slipped out of the public eye with the same volatility that had defined their final years in the spotlight. Behind closed doors, the consequences were far more severe than the public realized. Warner Brothers, once invested in building a multiverse around Ezra's version of The Flash, quietly severed ties. Plans for sequels dissolved. A character meant to become a franchise pillar was suddenly erased from future roadmaps. Insiders described the atmosphere as tense and uncertain. Studios didn't know whether to wait, recast, or abandon entire storylines. The financial implications were enormous, but the reputational risk was even greater. Meanwhile, families involved in the accusations continued their legal battles, and investigative journalists attempted to piece together a coherent timeline from testimonies riddled with fear, confusion, and contradictions. The Vermont compound, once rumored to be a spiritual refuge, now stood as a symbol of everything that had gone wrong. Friends described Ezra's mental state as fragile. Former colleagues said the person they knew was gone. Even fans, once fiercely loyal, were divided between sympathy, disappointment, and disbelief. Ezra's retreat into isolation, reportedly for mental health treatment, marked a turning point. It wasn't redemption, nor was it closure. It was a pause, a moment where Hollywood, the public, and Ezra themselves confronted the same uncomfortable truth. Some falls are too deep to reverse quickly. By 2025, Ezra made cautious appearances at film festivals, signaling a desire to rebuild. But the shadow of their past loomed large. Every step forward carried the weight of unanswered questions. Every smile held the echo of a story that spiraled far beyond fame, far beyond Hollywood, and far beyond control. Ezra hadn't just lost a career. They had lost the narrative. In the end, the story of Ezra Miller isn't a clean narrative of rise and fall. It's a fragmented portrait of a person whose life veered off the path Hollywood imagined for them, shaped by pressures, vulnerabilities, and choices that spiraled far beyond anyone's expectations. Their transformation, from a promising young actor to a figure surrounded by fear, controversy, and cult-like rumors, is not just a cautionary tale. It is a reminder of how quickly fame can warp, and how quietly instability can grow when no one is willing to confront it. Ezra's retreat into treatment, their attempts to rebuild a career, and their tentative return to public events in 2025 all suggest someone trying to regain control. But rebuilding an image is far different from repairing a life. The controversies left scars on careers, on families, on reputations, and on the industry that once championed Ezra as its next breakout star. Hollywood may offer second chances, but it rarely forgets. And with Ezra, forgetting is impossible. The story is too strange, too dark, too deeply embedded in public memory. Yet the lingering question remains: what happens to a person after a collapse this public, this chaotic, this severe? Does redemption exist for someone whose downfall became a global spectacle? Can a star who once lost control ever truly regain it? Or will Ezra Miller forever be defined by the choices and events that turned a superhero into a case study in Hollywood instability? The truth is uncertain, and perhaps that uncertainty is the most honest ending this story can have. Ezra's future, whatever shape it takes, will unfold under a shadow of scrutiny and a world waiting to see what version of them emerges next. For now, one thing is clear: this wasn't just a fall from grace. It was a transformation the world never saw coming.